Welcome to our webinar this evening on the Marine Department for Film and TV. I'm Amy Shaw, co-manager of BECTU Vision, and I'm delighted to be hosting this webinar this evening. BECTU Vision is a Scotland-based training arm of BECTU, the UK-wide union. BECTU stands for Broadcasting, Entertainment, Communications and Theatre Union, and we support freelancers working in film and TV. BECTU Vision provides a wide range of support for crew in Scotland. We work with new entrants coming into the industry, looking for advice and support in their first jobs, people transferring their skills, such as some of you who are perhaps watching this evening. And we also support existing crew with a wide range of short courses and initiatives for individuals. And we support the wider industry in Scotland, creating safer, fairer and greener workplaces for our industry. We're funded by Screen Scotland, Scottish Union Learning and the BBC in partnership with BECTU. I'm delighted to be joined by two colleagues today, Matt Cambridge, Marine Co-ordinator and Dive Supervisor, and Harriet Lawrence, Supervising Location Manager. We're going to be talking a little bit about their careers, and they're going to be sharing their knowledge of the industry in the Marine Department. And we're also going to talk about our one-day training course that's currently open for applications. We have closed captions today, so if you'd like to use them, please just click on the double C at the bottom of your screen and they should come up for you. And I'm also joined by our coordinator, Claire Cook, who's working in the background to support all of our tech. If you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to add them to the Q&A box at the bottom and Claire will filter those through to us. Firstly, I thought I'd give you a brief overview of the landscape of filming in Scotland. Scotland's film and TV industry has grown rapidly. You may have seen newspaper articles and reports about productions filming in the streets of Edinburgh and Glasgow in the past year. It's really great news, and it means that production levels grow. We need more and more crew. We're hosting this webinar this evening to share a little bit of information and hopefully inspire some of you to consider working in our industry. We film a variety of programmes here, dramas such as Shetland, Guilt, The Rig, Outlander and Good Omens. We also have comedies such as Squad and factual and game shows like The Hit List and Ready Steady Cook. And we also film a lot of children's programmes here like Molly and Mac. And we've got our continuing flagship drama River City set in Shieldinch. We also have a number of feature films that film in Scotland, from small independent low budget ones right up to the Hollywood blockbusters such as Tetris and parts of Indiana Jones. The majority of this work is freelance, which means that each production hires its crew for that one job, and once they are finished on that, they then move on to the next production. And the length of those productions varies depending on what it is. A commercial may just be 1 or 2 days, or it could be a TV show that has 3 episodes and films for 12 weeks. Or if it's something like Good Omens or Outlander, which is a high-end television production, it may last for 8 to 12 months of the year. Beyond that flexible nature of work, it can also be that specific departments, such as the Marine Department, are only needed for a few days or weeks of these longer running productions, depending on what the script requires. The freelance nature of it means we don't always know what's coming up. There's no set calendar and the productions just pop up as and when throughout the year. So whatever job you're working on, you may not know which one you're going on to next, which is an adaptation for how many other people work in different industries. But it also means you're often working in different and unusual locations and always working with new people. The majority of the filming in Scotland tends to happen in Glasgow and Edinburgh. We have studio spaces in both of these cities, and we can also provide a number of different backdrops, such as flats, houses, rivers. However, we also on occasion, depending on the need of the production, venture to other areas of Scotland, such as to the Highlands or also to the coasts. It's really depending on what the story calls for. We tend to work quite long hours on productions. It can vary, but on a drama such as Shetland, a day would tend to start filming about 8 AM and finish around 6 or 7 PM, and that would be for 5 days a week. It's a 10 or 11-hour filming day, and we generally film through the daylight hours. But of course, if the story requires it, as many that are set in Scotland do, we often have night shoots that could shift and be starting at 7 o'clock at night and finish at 6 AM in the morning. It really varies, and although we tend to work 5 days a week, that can also vary a little bit too. We're really lucky that we get access to loads of amazing places to film in that the public often don't, but sometimes we're unable to do that during the week. So sometimes your 5-day work pattern can split over a weekend. But we're really well looked after in our productions. Most of them you'll get breakfast and lunch as well as an afternoon snack, as we know that an army matches on its stomach. I'm showing a Padlet at the end of this session that has loads of information about working in the film and TV industry in general, and some Scotland-specific links as well. So you can explore that, and we'll also share our contact details. So if you have any other questions about working in film and TV in Scotland, you can get in touch directly with us at BECTU Vision. You may have come across this webinar when reading about a one-day Marine Department training at First Stage Studios in Edinburgh, and I'll chat a little bit more about that later on. But as mentioned earlier on, I'm really delighted to be joined by our two guests today, and I'd like to invite them to tell us a little bit more about the Marine Department. So hello, Matt and Harriet, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Hi, Amy. Good evening. Thanks ever so much for inviting us.
Oh no, I'm great to have you here because you're experts in this department. So I'm really excited to hear more about what you have to say on the topic and pick your brains a little bit about the department and how it all works. I thought it'd be really interesting, first of all, I know that having spoken to many different people who work in the film and TV industry, no two people have the same route in. So I thought it'd be really interesting to hear from both of you about how you found yourselves working in film and TV. Matt, would you like to go first, or Harriet?
I'll lead with that one. Yeah, as you can imagine, a lot of individuals within our sector do actually fall into it by accident. I never initially planned, certainly when I was, in my teens and early 20s, to end up what I'm doing now. And I recognize also incredibly how fortunate I am. I had a background in the marine industry. I worked on vessels, and then latterly I served in the services in the Royal Marines. So I had a very good sort of bedrock and foundation of obviously working in and around water and all of the various environments and equipment that you would expect working in that sector. And then I also moved into diving. And then I was very fortunate to be asked to go and work as a diver on a Mel Gibson movie called Apocalypto. And that then moved on to other things. And this is whilst I was still serving. So it was part-time for me. It was a true freelance role. It wasn't full-time at that time. And then when I left the services, for me, that's when it really took off. I did more diving, and then my network grew, and just a lot of luck, a lot of networking, a lot of making yourself available at the right time, and then obviously turning up and doing what I hope is a fairly reasonable job. I'm still here, so and then it just grows. So that's how I got in. It's a healthy accident, but I'm incredibly lucky and very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing now.
And Harriet, what about you?
I have to say I fell into it by accident as well, sort of about 30 years ago, falling in, finding a career that I love. So as a location manager, I find the locations, and for every location we film, I will find anything from 2 or 3 to sometimes over 120 choices for the writer and director and producer. And I grew up just west of Edinburgh, and my father actually wrote all the sailing pilotage guides to the west coast of Scotland. So anything that involves boats and tides, as Matt knows, I get quite excited. I love a tide, and I love the fact that it makes filming even more complicated when everything's tidal. So I'm happiest when I've got a marine department to play with and filming on water. But really, my world can take me down anywhere. I'm sort of nosy, curious, whatever you want to call it. So all of that sort of scouting is just so much fun. And 30 years on, I still haven't really thought of a better way to earn a living. So yeah, I'm still here, and people still ask me back.
One of my favorite questions to ask, because it is always really interesting to hear about people's previous experience, because so often people are taking their hobbies or interests and transferring into our industry. I think that happens for so many departments, and it's a really nice thing. And I think it comes across from both of you that it can replace a passion, and then you get to put that passion into your work, which is such a brilliant thing. Now, the Marine department is potentially one that a lot of people maybe haven't heard of before we sent out our adverts and tried to promo it for our one-day course. People know about the camera department, they know about the director, we hear those common roles all the time, but I feel like Marine department's maybe one that's a little bit of an unsung hero. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Marine department, how it's made up and what's involved in it?
Yeah, I think we should probably just start with maybe describing production a little bit, because it's quite an alien world. We've got a few slides just to help us keep on track, and hopefully people will look at the slides rather than us then. So I will just share my screen, if that's okay, and then I'll start with a bit about production, and then Matt can sort of literally dive into the detail of the Marine department. So hopefully you have a picture saying training there.
We do.
Great. So working on a production sort of can have a very long prep period, which is where the producers are trying to find the right crew, they're trying to find the actors, they're trying to find the money sometimes. But the bit that Matt and I get very involved with is what is known as principal photography. So the prep for that over a few weeks, and then when the cameras are actually rolling, which will be a lot of people will have seen pictures of film crews on streets, probably less so on water, but we are there, obviously, which is what we're going to talk about. But the type of productions that are in the UK, I think, Amy, you touched on some of those amazing statistics of what our industry contributes to the economy, which is brilliant for everyone, because it's growing. Not quite so great at the moment with the actors on strike, but hopefully they will be back out and making lots soon. So there's sort of UK homegrown drama, like you were talking about Shetland. There's high-end TV, that's inward spend. A lot of American studios love coming to the UK. Quality of their crew, the locations, the studios, and just, you know, it's just really good quality professional technicians here. There are indie films. There's some of the lower budget ones Amy was talking about there. And then you've got the big American studio features like Tetris and Indiana Jones that was filming in Glasgow not that long ago. You've got smaller kids dramas, commercials, stills. We get involved in pretty much everything. You know, there's animation as well, but they probably don't need a Marine coordinator in animation. Well, you never know, Matt. You might get away with it. A film set, a film unit is quite an alien place to lots of people who haven't seen it. There are an awful lot of people there, all with strange job titles. There's an awful lot of technical kit. There are a lot of vehicles. There are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of people with a slightly different agenda. But we're there. One of my jobs is to pull all of that together and work with the specialist departments and make sure that they've got what they need to feed into the shoot day. So my team are there enabling every other department. And when you work with really good teams, it makes work, you know, those long days that Amy was talking about, much, much more enjoyable. And so I would work with the Marine coordinator on a very early part of the shoot if we were out on location, to just talk through what they want. And Matt and I have worked on a job where we spent more than 8 weeks where every single day was tide dependent. So the tide was literally shifting sands and mud, and every single day was scheduled around the tide. So that sort of kept us all on our toes. But I will hand over to you, Matt, just so that you can talk a bit more about what the Marine Department is, and then jobs within it, and then how we work with other departments.
Thanks, Harriet. So the way the process or my workflow would typically go, we would see a script, or we would have a phone call around, there's an idea, a location, somebody wants to tell a specific part of a story. And invariably, we rely very heavily on individuals like Harriet, the location managers, who will then go and, with the vision or the creatives, go and see or source the locations through where we'll be working. Sometimes we look at the location and there's a big question mark, and you think, really? How are we going to do this? Because as you can imagine, a lot of the locations may look fantastic on camera, be scenic, stunning, but as a working environment, that's the challenge. We have to get a unit into these locations. So we're always striking the balance between understanding what we're trying to do creatively, and then the logistics of getting a film unit into that space, and then obviously working safely, and then getting everybody out. The Marine Department, actually, if there's anything that's going to be shot in and around water, as Harriet's mentions, within the various sort of categories, we're responsible for wrapping ourselves, for want of a better expression, around the production. And that's all of the departments. From a very, very early stage, we engage with them, and we can advise costume, hair, makeup, camera, obviously, special effects, visual effects, stunt departments, art departments, visual effects, how they need to perform their roles, again, within our setting, because the majority of their work will be dry. And that can also be within a studio. So working in a marine environment on, in and around water, obviously that can flag up lots of issues for them, which we very early on can direct, and that can support them with safety, budget, and also what the camera sees and the creativity of it. So in a best case scenario, we get embedded very, very early on to support and guide those decisions. The safety bit of what we do is is categoric. Obviously, that's the foundation and the bedrock of everything that we do. The marine departments typically are separated into two parts. So you'll have everything that happens on surface and above, and then you'll have everything that happens under the water. And we separate that by having a diving department coordinated by the diving supervisor. And then we have the marine coordinator, and the marine coordinator is overall responsible for the whole of the project that's happening on the water. So that the moment that the production, and that can be at sometimes a 5-person crew, a very small camera crew for something like a natural history, for example, through, as Harriet mentioned, to a very large feature crew, up to 200 or 300 people in one location. So the safety for those individuals and all of their equipment and what we're doing, and obviously the cast is the bedrock of what we do. And then we build up around that. Beyond that, then all of the various technicalities come into what we're trying to achieve. Harriet, can you just go back a slide, please? Thank you. On the diving, we are very, very rarely diving. If anybody's watching, is from a diving perspective, we're very rarely diving anything deeper than 10 meters. It's incredibly shallow. We're diving under HSE regulations, the media ACOP, and it's really about supporting the underwater camera. So the cameras that are shooting underwater, we surround them with camera techs, safety divers, and obviously if we've got cast underwater performing or presenters doing pieces to camera, we then also surround them with additional specialities. That could be lighting or riggers. On the surface, we have the various vessels that are supporting everything behind camera. And that's camera boats, lighting boats, special effects boats. When I say boats, it can be actually any vessel. It could be anything from a very small inflatable, anything up to sort of a larger barge or an offshore vessel. So we have a full range of vessels that we use to support the logistics and all of the different departments on the water. Sometimes it can be as small as just having somebody in a dry suit or a wetsuit in a body of water, holding a light, holding something for a various department, and you'll be surprised at actually often how effective keeping it really simple over complicating it can be. A big part of what we do is sourcing picture boats. That's the boats that are seen in camera, also sometimes referred to hero boats. Traditionally, that would be something like a wooden boat or something quite unique. So we have to find those, and we can travel all around the world if it's a larger budget or a larger feature.
Or a cruise liner, Matt.
Or a cruise liner. Harriet's recently been looking for a cruise liner. And training cast is key. And that's anything can be, they need to look like they know what they're doing. So that could be driving a boat, pulling a rope, sailing a boat. It could be diving. It could be a scene where they actually need to be diving, or they need to be doing something underwater where they don't have an air source. By that, I mean a regulator in their mouth or a means of getting air to them underwater. So we would train them for those scenes, and often those scenes take place in a studio space. And there are we have studio spaces. You've got one in Scotland, and in London. There are those overseas as well. So the Marine Department we're enablers. We take what the story is trying to tell, and then we advise all of the specialisms around that to support what the story is trying to tell. Next slide, thanks, Harriet. Okay, so let's look a little more deeper into the jobs within a specific Marine department. As I've mentioned, the Marine Coordinator traditionally has overall responsibility for everything that's happening on and around the water. The dive supervisor is normally assisting the Marine Coordinator, and we tend to separate those two roles. This enables that the dive supervisor can focus purely on everything that's happening under the water. Then we have the divers. The divers also have specializations. You have a general utility diver. They will be in the UK HSE qualified. We're going to talk a little more about qualifications later. And so far as the divers go, they can find themselves undertaking rigging tasks, lighting, placing pieces of set, moving pieces of props, art department around. It can be often, I would actually say, quite very long days and very repetitious. Safety diving for cast is one of the main key roles that our divers perform. So when we've got cast and crew in the water, that's everybody supporting the shooting, and obviously everybody in front of camera. Our divers are in the water, often literally just out of shot or can be under the water, just there to support them from a safety perspective, logistically, and to hand them things. And obviously in the event of them needing support air getting out, they are there to enable that. And then within the boats, we have our crews. So we have the helms and the skippers, depending on whatever vessels we're using on, and the crews that would be working within that. Again, just be very transparent. A lot of our days can be very, very boring. Handing out life jackets to 300 crew and then collecting them at the end of the day is not necessarily an exciting role, but as you can imagine, it's absolutely necessary, through to all of the other exciting things that happen when you're supporting all these various departments. It's very dynamic environment. Nothing is ever the same. And you have to rely very, very heavily on excellent communication between all of these roles within the Marine Department, within all these different specializations. And then finally, as I've already touched upon, training casts. So we may have somebody rowing a boat, we may have somebody driving a boat, sailing. They need to make it look really convincing to sell the story. And I've mentioned anything that might be happening underwater. A good example would be last year we had to train some casts how to fight underwater with no airway, it's obviously on a breath hold, in a Land Rover that was sinking through the water column of over about 8 meters. So that's very complicated in how we would build that up. Next slide.
I think, Matt, you know, when we run this training day, we'll look at some of those case studies, won't we? We'll sort of actually, there are sort of 3 or 4 films that we'll actually look at in more detail, and you can talk about how you made it happen.
Absolutely.
And your guys quite often will stand in for the actors, won't they? Because on a filming day, a lot of our day is setting up and preparing for it, and very rarely would you keep the cast in front of the camera while we were adjusting lights and set and props and so on. So your team will quite often take that role of standing in if it's underwater, won't they?
Absolutely. And aside from that, a good example would be if we're training cast for a specific piece or a specific scene. Obviously, we'll have a stunt double, and we train the stunt double and the cast member in parallel, because for obvious reasons, if you're in an environment where there's a greater risk to the cast, we would need to get the stunt performer to come in and work their magic. And that, again, that's a careful balance for us, because you don't necessarily know when or who is going to be taking over that role. In other words, when the cast is going to say, I'm not happy with this, or it might be somebody else that says that, and then the stunt double comes in. So we train them both in parallel, so then when we're actually shooting, we've got flexibility as to who's going to be doing what. Obviously, the more dangerous and more exposed scenes, or the greater risk, we would use the stunt performers.
I think you've sort of covered the departments that you work with, but just sort of summing it up, really, from finding boats that are in vision in front of the camera, that's working with the art department, and as you say, it can be anything from a small boat to an absolutely huge. Weren't you looking for an icebreaker a couple of weeks ago?
Yes. Yeah. Not successful. Yeah.
And then scoping for feasibility. I mean, there's a location that we'll talk about on the training day, but it was sort of, the designer fell in love with it. I mean, utterly in love with it. And it was an impossibly stupid location to actually make one of our hero locations. But we ended up working with the Marine Department and actually having them running a ferry service out to this tiny little hut on a bit of mud. And, you know, the Marine Department were embedded in just enabling the crew to get to and from the location. So some of that needs to happen very early on, because producers need to understand the cost implications of that. Helping the art department, special effects you work very closely with, don't you, Matt?
Yeah, incredibly. A typical, that can be anything from fire, smoke, sparks, wind, rain. It's a great one is obviously generating fog on water is always very popular. So we have specialist boats that we use for that, believe it or not, because the smoke machines can generate a lot of heat, and often sometimes a naked flame, because there's gas involved. So we need specialist boats for that. So you can't stick something like their equipment on an inflatable boat.
Oh, it just sounds like some of the stuff we do is completely mad.
A lot to go wrong. Yeah, there's a lot to go wrong.
But
I'll just talk briefly on camera boats, if I
Yeah,
may.
go on.
Camera boats are very, very specialist platforms for us. They can be anything from a small flat bottom inflatable where we'd be working in, let's say, a pond or a river or a lake, where you need small, minimal footprint. We have to often consider the environment, obviously, with what we're taking into these places. So we would, in those locations, we often use electric outboards obviously to control pollution, to control noise. That's noise from the environment, but if we're recording for sound, outboard engines, as we know, can be quite noisy. The new 4-strokes are phenomenal, but even so, sound can be an issue. So we'll often use electric outboards if we're recording sound. The camera boats are often small catamarans, and the camera platform can be a camera operator holding the camera shoulder mounted, hand mounted, or sticks, which are the tripods that you'll see cameras on, through to a crane, or a jib arm. And a crane is what you would see like a techno crane, which is telescopic with a gyroscopic head on the end. As soon as you get into that world of having a much larger crane on board, that starts to get quite complicated, because as you can imagine, you need a very stable platform and you need a lot of crew to operate all of that. So the numbers start to swell significantly as well. That's all I'm going to touch upon now for the camera boats. And then just moving on quickly, we've got our underwater teams, which often are, like I mentioned, are totally focused around camera, supporting the underwater camera operators. They're very specialist individuals. They spend their life underwater holding camera. It can be in studio, in all sorts of bodies of water, white water, benign lakes, canals, ponds, black water sometimes, and open water like ocean and coastal waters as well. But as I mentioned right at the start, crew safety is the bedrock of what we do, and it's how we approach every single production from the outset with any location and whatever we're trying to shoot.
And I think crew quite often don't understand how important you are at keeping them safe, because they probably don't know the risks that they're at some of the time, because being on location is very complicated, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it is, and it's a very good example of how everybody becomes incredibly task focused, because everybody has it. Obviously, they have their job to do, and just being realistic and transparent, a location or a studio can be inherently a very stressful environment, and the thing we are always fighting is time.
I'm tied.
And time
We've
and
been
time.
there, Matt. We've been there.
It's the same thing. We're always fighting time. So there's always a deadline around something. And as we know, the best plan is often blown apart by things beyond our control. So we have to just keep individuals safe whilst they're focused on performing their roles. And this is where the crew really have to have amazing situational awareness and head on a swivel, always seeing what's going on around them. Obviously, they're responsible for their own safety and the rest of the safety team, but it's their main focus is the whole of the film unit.
I mean, you'll see in some of these photos, as Matt was talking about, sometimes it can be very small ribs or inflatables, but here they've got people around the cast, they've got a sound man in the water, there's people standing by for safety in that bottom left-hand photo, and then in the top left-hand photo you've got the camera crane that Matt mentioned there. So that stable platform, I don't know if you can see that very well, but there's a telescopic crane on there and a lot of people near water, so very much reliant on the marine department in many areas of that shoot. Producers find being out on location, I mean, you get amazing sort of value for money being on location, especially somewhere as beautiful as Scotland, and so nautical and with so much body of water that just give us that stunning in-vision look on cinema. But producers love a controlled environment, and in order to be a completely controlled environment, we would be looking at an underwater stage. Now, this is very much not my area because I'm usually out in that cold and wet environment. Matt sometimes gets this dry, warm environment.
So this is our go-to where we need to create obviously a warmer, safer, better quality of water environment. And a lot of the scenes can be incredibly complicated because there can often be a lot of rigging, a complicated set which is art department's responsibility, props. There can be more than one camera in the water, but often it's around, there's a longer scene and you just can't shoot that on location, be it tide, wind, visibility, it's too cold, and everything's just too unpredictable. So we bring it into a studio where all of that becomes much more predictable, much more controllable, and obviously inherently much more safer. From a cost perspective, because of that predictability, we're not worried about losing light, wind, actually losing a day through to weather. So with this studio that the image that's up now is a studio in Europe, and a typical studio will have a body of water. To all intents and purposes, it's a swimming pool. It's heated to between 30 and 36 degrees. That's, as you can imagine, a lot of people go, that sounds quite warm. But as you know, if you're immersed in water all day, it inherently just becomes a very, very cold space to be. But also we're always thinking about the cast. It's about keeping the cast comfortable. Obviously, they're freshwater, and we try to keep the environment with as minimal chlorine as possible, so it's not irritating eyes. If you want somebody to look beautiful and happy, or as a specific piece of makeup, having red eyes from having 2 or 3 days underwater isn't a particularly good look.
Okay, there's it.
And then we would also be putting the vessels in it, or to support the balance of the telling of the story. And that being in a studio can be bookended by we've been shooting on location, and then we'll come into the studio, and then we'll go back out onto location. So it can be anything from 2 hours up to, if it's a dedicated or complicated underwater movie or production, or it's a complicated scene, there can be an enormous amount of preparation to build the set, to get everybody prepared, camera tests, stunt tests, special effects tests. It's pretty endless, and that takes a long time. There are also things like art department may use a particular coating, or the costume department might use a material that we stick in the water, and because we're using it for a long period, it starts to do odd things. So we have to do research and development with that early on. So that's what I was talking about. Having that early input with those departments can really help them, where you flag up to them, what are you going to be sticking in the water? Right, okay, let's start working through how that's going to behave over a period of time. Lighting is a big one, and then the special effects can be water. Special effects will be provided by water cannon tip tanks to generate the effects that you want on the water: wind, rain, water cannon, bubbles, ripples, waves. It's pretty endless. And this studio that you're looking at now is a dedicated space. It's all touch of the button, state of the art, and it's actually got a floodable water paddock. So you've got a smaller tank space with the deeper water, which is 9 meters deep. And then where we need to have a larger body of water, we can flood the whole of the studio.
Sorry, Matt.
It's all right, it's fine. It's a good time
forward.
to move on.
So yeah, and that's the sort of other end of the scale, isn't it? Where you have a controllable tank, but it's outside.
So yeah, often in warmer environments, obviously, because if it's outside, you want better light, warmer, year-round operation. Most of these you'll find in Europe, in the sunnier climates, and that's where you've got the bigger scenes. Perhaps you've got moving vessels, bigger vessels, tend not to do too much diving, anything under the surface on these. It's mostly everything on the surface. You'll find in a bigger paddock tank like that, you'll have a deeper part in the middle to accommodate a keel from a larger vessel, or if there is going to be a diving scene around it, to get an underwater camera in place. But they become very busy, and there's a lot of moving parts to outdoor paddock tanks. As you can see by that image, like a full-size vessel. We often you wouldn't necessarily put an actual vessel in there. art departments or construction teams will often make an incredible, realistic looking galleon, which is underneath actually an old, like an old barge. It's phenomenal what they can do. And you don't know until you're stood within, inches of it. It's phenomenal what they can achieve.
So I hope, Amy, that sort of covers a bit of what we do. We'll hand back to you in just a moment. But I mean, both of us love what we do. It's varied. It's as Matt says, very different. No 2 days, no 2 jobs are the same. And there are new challenges on every job. Matt and I were working earlier this year on something that was really quite complicated, actually. And sadly, we're not filming it at the moment because of the actors, but hopefully we'll get back to filming that. And some very complex sort of special effects builds. We were going to be on location. So the combination of that. And as I said, for me, as long as there's a boat or water involved, I'm usually happy on location. And occasionally I get to drive really big boats.
Is that boat actually moving, Harriet?
I think it's not. Nobody is going to actually put me in charge of a gigantic ferry. But anyway, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand back to Amy and see if there are any questions or whether we've excited people. I mean, we did touch on freelance, didn't we, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. We've kind of mentioned that kind of freelance side of working and the way that it works. And just obviously I've been working with the two of you over the last few months to set up this training day, and I've learned a whole lot about the Marine Department, but listening to you talk about it just now, it's just phenomenal how much goes into it and how people probably aren't aware of any tiny little bit of that. And then Matt, you've talked through all the different parts of the department and different responsibilities that you have and the different ways that you work creatively and logistically to make it happen. It kind of blows my mind a little bit. One question that I had for you was, we've talked a lot about the responsibilities that the different people in the department have. Are there any specific qualifications that you would need to come into the department, or is there just certain experiences that would be useful, or is there anything that people would definitely need to have?
Okay, no, it's a question we get a lot, and the perception is that I need to have a whole bank of qualifications or have been working in another department within the sector for a considerable time. That is not true. The baseline qualifications that we go for to work are specifically for diving. It would be HSC media, and then around that, if you've got any additional qualifications, medic, for example, is a very good one for us, because obviously the more medics that we can put within our team, the more effective we can be. RYA powerboat qualifications are also key, commercially endorsed.
Matt, you wouldn't necessarily need to be a diver and be a boat operator, would you?
That's a really good.
That's a lovely combination, but you do use both people and they can't necessarily do the other thing.
To be highly employable, go for both. But it depends on what the roles, what we're shooting. Obviously, if it's a dedicated diving scene, then we're only going to be, we're using divers. But what I would say is, if you have if you've got a background in the outdoors, or you've got a background in fishing, you've got a background in diving, or you've worked in and around water, you could be a paddler, kayaker, you could be a climber. It's those individuals that are working out in an outdoors environment that have got a really clear understanding of where risks lie, and then identifying those and working within our team to obviously manage those risks with the kit that we use. And actually, that's it as a sort of baseline. Beyond that, obviously, all of the normal transferable skills that we would expect, problem solving, I've mentioned situational awareness. Film sets and film locations are incredibly dynamic environments. Things change by the minute, and you have to be reactive to that. So if you don't have that sort of flexible team player mindset, and you're used to having a very rigid work day, or your role is used to being very rigid, I would suggest that this isn't an industry for you, because that is not what it's like. It's very, 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 very variable. Personally, that's why I love it.
And there is a lot of strong personalities, aren't there, Matt? I mean, both of us work in a sort of service department, really, don't we? We are servicing the creative needs of the film. but yeah, it does make it fun.
Obvious things is things like calm under pressure, being able to manage the sort of the underlying stress that you'll feel on a lot of locations and a lot of shoots. And finally, for me, zero ego. Egos is specifically in a marine department are really dangerous, where people have the mentality of been here, done it, seen that. I've got all the tickets and I've done this before. Is not the approach that we would want in specifically on our jobs, because every job is different. I've never done anything which you would say is repetitious from job to job. So every time you're learning something new, be it the environment, the kit, the scene, the story, working with the other departments, the size of the departments, the complexity. But you're always relying on your background. And then it's like we're making educated decisions about how we're going to solve these problems. And they do present themselves. It's just constant problem solving. That's why it's exciting. And like I said, the more you're on the set and the location, the gradient of learning is very, very, very quick.
I mean, for Matt, for a diver, for example, to have a ticket, it's not the same on a film set, is it? Because, you know, you possibly need those guys standing in, and they would need to be holding a position in front of a camera for a long time. It's not just the same. So the ticket is the start. That's great. That gets you sort of like into it. And then Matt and his team would really need to work with you to understand, I suppose, the etiquette and the hierarchy and the very odd nature of filming, which is lovely for people who don't like routine.
Anybody that's listening or watching, if you've ever had the benefit of being around it, you'll understand what we're saying. But it's only when you've been within a unit and you understand that there's a lot of stuff that's unspoken. It's like a bit of subliminal understanding where you should be standing at times. Obviously, things like eye lines of cameras are critical, but within a location and within a unit, there are definitely places that you shouldn't be standing. And in my early days, I was caught out, and I'll never forget it. You only get told that once.
Were you always in the wrong place?
Pardon?
Were you always in the wrong place? Just
always in the wrong place. Not anymore. I've learned.
Just to pick up on that, obviously, for people that are coming in who don't have a lot of experience, we've got our one-day course that we'll touch on in a little minute. But if you're coming into the industry, we've talked an awful lot about the responsibilities that the Marine Department has, but you would have that opportunity to come into the department and learn on the job. So it wouldn't be that you would expect it on your first day to understand.
No, not at all. No.
Kind of progressive department where you can come in at entry level, even if you're transferring from another sector, you bring all those skills and then you would learn on the job. So you wouldn't necessarily have responsibilities on your first day. It's all about kind of learning as you go. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously that depends by whichever organisation or whichever coordinator or diving supervisor is managing that job. But in principle, yeah, of course, you're not expected to turn up on day one with your ticket and your bit of experience and just get thrown into a team. You know, you would expect to be mentored so long as you've had those conversations around everybody's marrying everybody's expectations. And it's worth noting that, you know, a big motivation for us starting this scheme in Scotland and promoting this is that on the rig, which we did in Leith Docks, you know, it was disappointing for us that we brought a large crew up from the south, and that just feels nuts because we know there's an incredible amount of talent in Scotland that we should be engaging and training up, and then using locally. You know, let's use all this domestic talent that you've got there. So, and there are organisations in Scotland that already exist that do this, and we can, you know, when we take this further with you, we can signpost you to those organisations, and then you can start applying and say, look, I'm here. This is what I've got, and I'm now qualified, or I am qualified. I'm available for work on these dates.
And I think we probably should be fairly clear that this isn't a full-time job. It is freelance, and we would expect participants to be sort of become part of a pool that can be pulled on and pulled into a film that is particularly watery or has a, you know, a lovely dive element or whatever. But it would probably work best alongside, at least initially, alongside an existing job. Matt, am I right in saying that there's, I mean, there are sort of tens of people who work in a marine department, that's their full-time career, but you have this enormous network of people who work in the oil industry or wind farms offshore, or, you know, the fishing industry, or driving ferries. Like, I tried to drive a ferry and nobody would let me drive a ferry.
No, that's absolutely right. It's that there aren't many that it is their full-time career.
But it's a lovely
the
thing
owners
to
of the
have
business,
as a part of your portfolio career. Is that
Yeah.
is that the buzzword for these days?
I mean, it's an increasing number of individuals that do earn their living from this full time, but it's like it's a typical pyramid, and then you've got, you know, there's the middle band of those that are qualified, committed, and obviously availability is a big thing, because often, because of the nature of it, it is a part-time freelance role from the majority of people in this sector. It's whether you're available. So that for us, you know, we would have a job come in, and we would look at our crew database, and then say, right, we're crewing up for this job. These are the guys that got the qualifications, the competence, and a lot of it is also personality driven. Would they fit well within this production? Because there are some individuals that are exceptional technically, but you wouldn't necessarily want them to go and stand next to that individual, or it could be a member of a cast member. And that's no slur on them. It's just a clash, you know, as people do in life. So I think a lot of the skill of what we do is marrying personalities, and that just being tactful is probably what I'm trying to say.
We've had a couple of questions come in, if I can put them to you. The first question is, if I was to come and work in the Marine Department, would I need to bring any equipment with me?
The bare minimum, it depends what the job is and where, but the bare minimum would be exposure protection. Obviously, if we're under the water, it would be exposure protection. And by that, I mean a wetsuit or a dry suit, and it would be your own fins and masks. We would supply everything that you're reliant for breathing on. We supply life jackets. If you're on surface in a vessel, it would be everything that you'd need to expect to be out, depending on what the weather is for that day. So the answer is actually very little. You don't need to go out and spend huge sums of money on expensive equipment. It's not necessary.
And if people are transferring skills in, we would presume that someone who is driving about, you know, helmsman or whatever, has that level. But there's nothing specialist for the film industry, Matt, is there?
No, not at all. You're not expected to turn up with, you know, bits of camera tripods or a light meter or anything like that. It's
GoPros or whatever.
It's the key for us is to make sure that our crews are comfortable, you know, safe, comfortable, warm. That it's the welfare bit, because if we're not comfortable and safe and happy, it's pretty hard to look after other people. So that's for us, that's quite high on making sure that people come to work properly equipped and properly. It's all very well being equipped, but obviously then understanding how to use what you've been given.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there a lot of jobs needing filled in the Marine Department at the moment? I know we've touched on that a little bit just in the conversations that we've been having about the fact that the department's growing, and I think it's probably just worth mentioning again, as you were saying, Matt, we're trying to grow a pool in Scotland. It's kind of us trying to be a little bit ahead of the game, I suppose, in that we know that there's more productions filming, and your experience on the rig, what we're keen to do through this initiative, and just going forwards, everything that we do at BECTU Vision, we deliver an initiative and we deliver training courses, but then we have ongoing support continuously. So if somebody comes across this webinar in 6 months' time, don't worry, we're still here for you.
Well, I mean, our goal here. Sorry, Amy. Sorry,
Go.
Our goal here is obviously to establish a crew base in Scotland. Beyond that, so looking to the future, because I think you know, the ambition that you've got for productions coming to Scotland, we need to make sure that you can service that demand as for when a production comes to Scotland, be it in the studios or on locations. That's really key. So that's my first response. The other bit is it's very hard for me to say what productions we have on at the moment. The strikes have hit us they have really hit the industry very hard. First of all, it's the writer's strike. We've briefly touched upon this, and then the actors' strike, and that has a knock-on effect right the way down through the industry. On the whole, it's quite buoyant, and next year we are expecting to be busy. But we're on pause at the moment. So we're in a training mode, we're in a holding pattern. Everything that we were shooting is literally we've just pressed pause on it, and everything's just been put in a sort of a mothball state because of the actors' strike. That's not to say that there isn't domestic projects going on, or independent or indie projects, or natural history. That still goes on.
We don't have any sort of crystal ball to know what those scripts are going to be and how much water stuff there is. But, you know, I think the message from all three of us here is that the industry is incredibly strong. The strike is an anomaly, and it will end, and we'll all get back to, you know, making as much as we were, if not more. But we don't know if those scripts are going to be very watery. I mean, Matt and I were working on something when we first stood down for the strikes, and that's still got a lot of water stuff in it, hasn't it, Matt?
Considerable amount. But it's quite a tricky question to answer. But if you I wouldn't take a 1-year view at it, and I probably wouldn't take a 2-year view at it if you're thinking, well, we weren't very particularly busy. For example, if was it last year? It was very quiet. You need to really look at this sort of like a 3 to 5 year longer perspective. And if you look at it, as Harriet said, the sector's very buoyant, and it's obviously down to the streamers. Netflix, Amazon, Paramount, Disney. They're going to need content.
And I don't think we're looking to enable someone with, as we've said, not a full-time career, but just another string when they've got these amazing skills. We want to make sure that we harness them into this sort of like pool, as you've both said, of talented and crew that we can call upon when we need to.
And like anything, it's down to your own individual motivation. How much do you want it? If you network, get yourself in the right place, talk to the right people. And often it's luck. Just like with me, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time when I started out. But a lot of it is down to luck as well.
I was as well.
I think luck gets you started. You say luck, but then you were obviously in the right place, putting yourself out there, wanting to be in the industry and seeking the opportunities. And then beyond that luck that a lot of people put it down to, it's about you putting as you said, Matt, doing the networking, getting yourself connected, pushing yourself forward. That's what takes you forward. It's not. Another question, we've got another couple of questions, so I'll run through them quite quickly. And again, this kind of touches back, but how are jobs in the Marine Department advertised? I'd say in film and TV, we don't operate like other industries. We don't have we don't share on Guardian jobs or S1 jobs. We try as much as possible to go under the radar. We don't like people to necessarily know what we're up to. We don't like to draw attention to ourselves. So production.
It's a network again, isn't it?
Advertising. In Scotland, we do have a new jobs board that we've just launched with Film Bang. There's a link to that on our Padlet that we'll share later. And that's an opportunity that productions are now using to share opportunities for people coming into the industry for different departments and different roles. I'd say in the Marine Department, probably at the moment, what we're still looking at is kind of creating a pool of talent that we can do through our courses that Matt and other people who work full time in the Marine Department would then have as a kind of base to use for contacting people. And again, those organisations that work in Scotland regularly providing support for people working on and in water for film productions. Again, it would be about connecting with them. So when we're doing the training course, we'll provide all those connections, but we'll also do follow-up. As I say, there's the Padlet and there's ourselves at BECTU Vision that can also be a contact point for you to kind of be connected with industry as and when you've kind of done the basic courses that you would need to do moving forward. But it is a kind of BECTU Vision's here to provide a support for people trying to find work in the industry. So if you're not seeing jobs advertised, that's not just about you not being able to find them. They're generally not out there in a traditional form. So we kind of need to break down those barriers, and hopefully we can be a contact point for you to help you with that.
Can I also mention a big part of what we do is discretion so far as confidentiality goes. There are some projects for obvious reasons that they don't want to shout about the fact that what's being filmed. So NDAs come into play on it could be anything from a fairly small production to something quite significant. So you don't often stick out. You won't in that respect, and we rely very, very heavily on our network. And I've been in positions where we've really need to crew up quite quickly, and we haven't had enough crew in a specific location. And we are going to our teams and saying, do you know anybody that have these qualifications? It doesn't matter that they've never worked in a unit before, that we really need them. And so it's the network is really, really critical. And I'm looking forward to growing that in Scotland, because obviously I have colleagues within other organisations that do what I do, and freelancers, and within businesses, so that when they come to Scotland, they're aware of your crew base and obviously those individuals.
Thanks, Matt. Are there any physical requirements to do the job? Do you have to be in very good shape to do it? And also, is there a maximum age for divers?
To be commercially endorsed for your diving and for your for example, your powerboat certificate, both require medicals. The diving one is quite stringent. You do need to be fit and physically fit. The seafarers one to have a commercial endorsement is less stringent. But yes, the answer is yes. Obviously, the fitter you are, you have to remember you're performing a safety role. So you need to be able to look after yourself, and potentially, we need to think worst case scenarios. So the fitter physically, and I'm going to say it, mentally, you can be, obviously the better. You're only going to sort of support and benefit a unit better and more effectively. But it's not a total prerequisite if you can work if you don't have those medicals, because we do have roles that are what we refer to as topside. So I feel like I've contradicted myself there, but it's not an absolute no, but you do generally need to be quite fit and be able to pass medicals.
I think that's useful context though for people who are kind of tuning in for the first time to kind of understand. Yeah.
I can expand on that on the day when whoever wants to come.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, I can't believe that we're almost at the very end of this webinar. An hour has flown by talking about all things on, in and water safety. One question I'm always really interested to hear from people who work in the industry is, we talk about those long hours and we talk about how it's hard and how you might spend days in water and all the challenges that come with it, but why do you love it? You've both been in the industry for a long time now. What is it for each of you that really, what do you love most about it?
I think the variety and the people. I mean, it's just like nothing is ever the same. And problem solving, I think, Matt, you'd probably agree with me about that, is actually, every job is different and there's a different problem to solve, and try and find a way to enable the creatives to get what they want. And it's not always immediately obvious, but actually bringing lots of different departments together and that expertise, we can usually give the creatives whatever they want.
I have inherently a curious mind. So whether it's an environment where we're working, a piece of equipment, a storyline, somebody that's on the location that I want to talk to and learn from, or understand what their role is. So having a curious mind for me is it's addressing that, and I'm always trying to learn more so that I can support those units better. So for me, that's quite very, very inherently feels quite selfish. But I do realise some days you're stood in a location and it does feel at times you have to pinch yourself, because it can be a bit nuts so far as what you're trying to do or things that you'll see. Unique, it's very, very, very unique. But it's a fabulous way of passing your day. I mean, I've been on. I've been on. It's long, it's hard, but I've been on sub jobs, and I said I can't believe I'm being paid to be here. And I think if you say that during your working day, then I think it's quite a testament to how special it can be.
Oh, what a note to wrap us up on there. So as we mentioned, this webinar is running in conjunction with our one-day training course. It is happening on the 11th of November in the Leith Studios in Edinburgh. At first stage, we'll be doing some case studies, doing some deep dives into a few productions to see how they were done, how they were achieved, what happened, and talking a lot more about the film and TV industry in general. So if you are interested in applying for that course, Claire has added the link to our chat here. She's also added a link to our Padlet, which mentioned a few times, that has got a lot of different links and signposts If you're interested in working in film and TV in general, you'll find a lot of information there. If you've got any more questions about the training course itself, about working in the Marine Department, about working in film and TV in general, our email address is there. It's vision@bectu.org.uk. You can contact our team at any time, and we're more than happy to help in any way that we can. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights. You've almost convinced me that I want to work in the Marine Department. I'm on board. I want to do it. So thank you.
Come, Amy, come.
Thanks.
Please do.
The best jobs are where you've got great locations and the Marine Department and a lot of collaboration.
A lot of fun. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights tonight. Thank you so much to Claire behind the scenes for helping with our tech and filtering all the questions for us, and Louisa for doing the captions as well. And a huge thank you to our funders at BECTU Vision, Screen Scotland, Social Learning and the BBC in partnership with BECTU and Screen Scotland, who are funding this course specifically. Have a lovely evening, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you on a Marine Department in a sec very, very soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Amy.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.